The marriage that feels completely fine right now, calm, no big arguments, no affairs, nothing dramatic, that might actually be the one closest to the edge. I know that sounds backwards. I know it does. But I'm 76 years old, and I have watched enough marriages end in the last 30 years to tell you with absolute certainty that the ones that fall apart quietly are the hardest ones to see coming. My name is Dorothy, and I want to talk to you today about something that nobody in a long marriage really wants to hear. Because here's what I've learned. The thing that ends most long marriages isn't a catastrophe. It isn't a betrayal. It isn't one terrible night or one unforgivable moment. It's a Wednesday. A completely ordinary Wednesday where both people are tired and one of them decides not to try. And then the next Wednesday, the same thing happens, and nobody notices because it looks exactly like peace. I want to start with something that hit me hard when I first read it. Since 1990, the divorce rate for couples over 50 has more than doubled. More than doubled. And today it accounts for roughly 1 in 3 of all American divorces. Now, when I was raising my girls, divorce after 50 was something people whispered about. It was rare enough to be a neighborhood event. Now it's almost every other person I know at church. And what gets me, what genuinely keeps me up sometimes, is that according to survey data from AARP, almost none of these couples saw it coming 5 years before the split. 5 years before. They thought they were fine. They were making dinner and watching television and going to bed at the same time. And they had no idea they were already in the middle of something they couldn't stop. Now I want to tell you about a woman I know from my church choir. I'm going to call her Patricia. That's not her real name. I always change the names when I tell stories about real people. Just feels right. Patricia had been married for 31 years. Her husband was a good man, provider, never raised his hand, never ran around on her. Nobody would have looked at that marriage from the outside and seen a single thing wrong. But Patricia told me something 2 years after her divorce that I have never forgotten. She said, "Dorothy, I filed because I was tired of being invisible. Not unloved necessarily, just unseen. Like I was furniture that he'd stopped noticing." And that is not Patricia's story alone. That is 66% of all divorces filed by women over 50. Not affairs, not blow-up fights, decades of feeling invisible inside their own home. Therapists have a name for it: slow erosion neglect. And most husbands, I am told, genuinely do not realize it is happening until the papers arrive, because the warning signs look like silence, and silence feels like peace. That's the cruelest part of it. I think about Frank sometimes. My first husband. We were married for 33 years, and I loved him deeply, and I still grieved him for a long time after he was gone. But I will tell you honestly, there were stretches of our marriage, maybe the middle years especially, where I wasn't sure he saw me either. Not the way he did when we were young. And I never said anything. I was raised not to make a fuss. I wonder sometimes what would have happened if I had said it out loud. If I had said, "Frank, I need you to look at me like I'm still a person and not just the woman who keeps this house running." I never said it. And I don't know if that makes me part of the problem or just a woman of a certain generation who didn't have the words. But here's where it gets harder. And I want you to stay with me on this because what I'm about to tell you connects to something even bigger that I'll get to in a minute. A survey from 2022, and this one genuinely stunned researchers, found that 30% of Americans between 50 and 59 reported zero sexual intimacy in the prior 12 months. Zero. Not a little less, none at all. And that number had jumped 50% in just 4 years. Now, I know that's uncomfortable to hear, and it's certainly uncomfortable for me to say out loud. But I think it matters because what that number is really telling us isn't just about physical intimacy. It's about disconnection. It's about two people sharing a house and a last name and a bank account and somehow being entirely alone. Now, here's the thing that gives me hope about that statistic, because there is hope in it. Couples who scheduled even 1 moment per week of non-sexual physical touch, holding hands, a 6-second kiss, that's it, reported dramatically higher relationship satisfaction. Not passion, not romance, presence. Just the simple act of turning toward each other for 6 seconds. And I believe that because I know what it felt like when George would reach over and hold my hand during Sunday service and not say a single word. Just that, just the hand, and it meant everything. But I need to come back to something because I've been dancing around the financial piece, and I think people need to hear the full picture. A couple who divorces after 20 or more years doesn't just split their life in half. The math doesn't work that way. Financial advisors who specialize in this say that gray divorce destroys roughly 50% of accumulated wealth outright. Not divided, destroyed, through duplicate housing costs, attorney retainers that average $25,000 each, early withdrawal penalties on retirement accounts, and the brutal reality of running 2 households on income that was designed for one. Financial planners are now calling gray divorce the single largest retirement wealth destroyer in America. And a married couple needs roughly 30% less annual income to maintain the same lifestyle as 2 people living separately. Gray divorce doesn't just split a life. It mathematically downgrades both lives. And I want you to sit with that for a moment, because I know people who are unhappy in their marriages and are privately calculating whether they could afford to leave. The honest answer for most of them is not as comfortably as they think. But money, as hard as that is not the part that broke my heart the most. Men who go through gray divorce are 8 times more likely to die by suicide than their still married peers. 8 times. And the risk peaks in the first 2 years. Why? Because men over 50 have typically, without realizing it, outsourced their entire emotional life to their wives. Their social networks have quietly collapsed over the decades. The friendships dropped, the check-ins stopped, and the one person who knew everything about them, who held the whole weight of their inner life, is now gone. And they have nothing left, nobody to call, nobody who knows them. I think about that number and I think about the men I've known in my life. Good men, strong men, men who wouldn't ask for directions, let alone for help. And I understand exactly how it happens. I had a neighbor, I'll call him Robert, who divorced at 62 after 28 years. By all accounts, his wife was right to leave. He hadn't been present in years. But Robert, standing alone in that house with none of his old friends around, no children nearby, no practice at vulnerability, no idea how to need people, Robert was gone within 3 years. Not by his own hand, but his health failed so fast it was like watching someone just decide to stop. And I don't think he knew how to choose differently. Nobody had ever told him that the friendship he'd been putting off for 20 years, the weekly coffee, the phone call, the showing up, that wasn't optional. That was survival. Now here's the thing I keep coming back to, and this might be the most important number in everything I'm going to tell you today. Only 15% of long-married couples approaching retirement have ever sat down and had a serious conversation about what a shared Tuesday actually looks like. Not a vacation, not big life goals. A Tuesday, 8 in the morning, noon, 5 in the evening. What are we doing? What does this life we're building together actually look like hour by hour when the job is gone and the kids are raised and there's nothing but time? Retirement therapists say this missing conversation is the single biggest predictor of marriage crisis after retirement. Because 2 people who were perfectly good partners while they were busy, while they had structure and purpose and separate lives feeding back into a shared home, those 2 people can become unbearable strangers with nothing but free time and each other. I have seen it. I have watched couples who seemed solid fall completely apart within 18 months of retirement because they had no idea who they were together anymore, without the noise filling the space between them. And I want to connect that to something else because it's all one picture when you step back far enough. The average unhappy couple waits 6 full years before booking a single therapy appointment. 6 years. And researchers at the Gottman Institute, and I don't cite studies very often, but this one matters, they say that by year 4 of sustained unhappiness, contempt has replaced disappointment in most of those marriages. And contempt cuts the chance of recovery nearly in half. Disappointment says, I expected more from you. Contempt says, I no longer believe you're capable of more. Those are not the same thing, and you cannot walk back from contempt the same way you walk back from disappointment. 6 years. Think about what you could do in 6 years if you started one Wednesday instead of waiting. Here's something people don't talk about enough. When a long marriage ends, it doesn't just affect the two people in it. Adult children of gray divorce, grown children, people in their 30s and 40s, experience grief and loyalty conflicts and identity confusion at rates comparable to young children of divorce. Comparable. The belief that they're adults so they'll handle it is, according to family psychologists, clinically false. I think about Linda and Diane when I hear that. I think about what it would have meant for them if their father and I had separated. They were adults by 2004. They would not have been fine. And I knew that even without the research to back it up. But here's what I want to leave you with, because I have not told you all of this to frighten you. I have told you all of this because I believe that most of what I've described is preventable. Not with grand gestures, not with expensive vacations or dramatic reinventions, with 5 hours a week. 5 hours. John Gottman, and this is his work, his research, found that couples who give just 5 deliberate hours per week to each other are 86% less likely to describe their marriage as unhappy. 5 hours total. A 2-minute goodbye kiss in the morning. A 20-minute conversation at the end of the day. Real conversation, not logistics. 1 date per week. Expressed admiration. Just saying out loud what you appreciate, which costs nothing. And daily physical affection. That's it. That is the whole formula. And most long-married couples cannot find 5 hours per week for each other while averaging 28 hours of screen time. 28 hours of screen time. 5 hours for the person they chose. The thing that strikes me about George, and I think about him most when I talk about this, is that George never stopped being curious about me, even after 5 years, even after he knew all my stories and all my routines and all my bad habits. He would still ask me questions like he didn't know the answer, not because he'd forgotten, because he genuinely wanted to know how I saw things now, today, this version of me. And I didn't understand until after he was gone how rare that is. How much most of us, after a certain number of years together, stop asking and start assuming. We think we know. And certainty, I've come to believe, is where connection goes to die. The couples who make it past 50 together, and I've watched a lot of them from this side of life, they are not the ones who avoided problems. They are not the ones who had an easier road or got lucky with compatibility or skipped the hard years. They are the ones who refused to stop paying attention, who kept showing up on the ordinary Wednesdays when there was nothing romantic or urgent pulling them together. Just the quiet choice to try. That's it. That's the whole secret. And it sounds simple, and it is not simple, and it requires something that gets harder with every passing year of comfort and assumption and busyness and screen time. It requires deciding on an unremarkable day that the person next to you is still worth discovering. If something in what I've said landed with you today, if you recognized your own marriage in any of it, or your parents' marriage, or something you've been quietly carrying, I'd love for you to tell me about it in the comments. I read every one. And if you think someone you love needs to hear this, share it with them. Not as a warning, as a gift. Subscribe if you'd like to keep having conversations like this one. I'll be here.